Hello and welcome to another edition of The Intel with Greg Cosell, an Inside the Birds presentation. I'm Geoff Mosher from Inside the Birds, alongside my Inside the Birds co-host Adam Caplan, and with us is the star of the show, Greg Cosell. What's up, Greg? You ready for part two of The Intel?
I guess we'll find out once you start asking me about the players. Then we'll find out if I'm ready.
Yeah, we'll find out.
Well, you'll make it up, as you always say.
Yeah. Oh, I thought he was doing that.
I've been working on my press coverage all week, Geoff. So I guess I'm ready.
Awesome. Good. Well, I'm glad you've been working on press coverage because we will be talking about cornerbacks and safeties in this episode. We covered wide receivers and linebackers in episode 1. This is all geared toward NFL free agency. It's going to start in a couple of weeks. We're all going to be at the combine this week. So, a lot of discussions will be held in illegally, but yet legally in restaurants and bars across Indianapolis. But we're going to focus this time on cornerbacks and safeties. So let's start with cornerback. Obviously, it's a position we talk about, especially with the Eagles and the NFL, every single year, the importance of it. If you look at the Eagles right now, Greg, as we always start off, they're very set at one spot with Darius Slay, who's coming off a Pro Bowl year. They gave an extension to their slot corner, Avonte Maddox. It's that other corner spot that's still in flux. So what was your impression of Steven Nelson last year, who is going to be a free agent? And the Eagles kind of have to decide, do they want to go ahead younger and better, or maybe bring Steven Nelson or a veteran like that back? But what was your impression of Nelson's year?
I think their goal would be to get younger and better. I think Nelson was pretty much a stopgap. I think he had an up and down season. I think that Nelson doesn't give you everything you would want to be able to do at the corner position, given that they increased significantly their percentage of cover one as the season progressed. I don't think you feel really comfortable with Nelson in that role. I think there's too many limitations. And I've always liked Nelson, the manner in which he plays. There's just limitations to him physically. He's short. He doesn't run particularly well. So you can only do certain things with him. And I think that ultimately they would like to improve at the corner position opposite Slay.
Greg, and we're going to talk about the same thing with safety. As a general overview of cornerback, when you first started covering or actually grading tape many decades ago, has the cornerback position changed? Because, you just talked about Eagles man coverage versus zone coverage. Is the responsibilities and the difference between what you noticed many years ago and what you noticed lately this past season, or recent years, has it changed in terms of how it's coached and how these guys have to perform?
You mean corner in general?
Yeah, corner, yes.
Oh, well, I think one of the things about corner in this league is you have to be able to line up and play man coverage. Now, there's different forms of man coverage. Obviously people think of man coverage as press man. You don't always have to play press man. You'd like your corners to be able to do that. And there's two different kinds of press man. There's press man where you're physical and you jam receivers off the ball. Then there's press man, what we call mirror match press man, where you let the receiver declare his release and you mirror his release and his stem and his route. And you don't necessarily play physically with him. And then, of course, there's off coverage man, which, depending on the player, can be harder to do at times because you're kind of reacting. You're giving him free access off the ball to develop some kind of speed and velocity, and then you have to be able to react to that. But if you look at the percentages of teams in the league, Adam, that play man coverage, a good percentage of man coverage, there's a lot of teams that play a pretty good percentage of cover one. And cover one is man coverage with a single high safety. And for the most part, that safety is not a big factor on many throws. So you're matching up to wide receivers outside the numbers pretty often. And you have to be able to do that no matter what technique you use. Every team would like the ability to play man. It's just too hard not to if you're not going to play man. So that trait, the ability to play man, is absolutely critical in this league.
It's interesting, though, because as we look at Jonathan Gannon, the defensive coordinator for the Eagles, he did play more zone throughout the first half of the year. He just had to switch when things weren't working. He came from Indianapolis, which plays a ton of zone, if I'm not mistaken.
They play more man than you think.
Did they start off that? Was that just last year, or were they traditionally man under when Eberflus was there?
They started to play more man last year in 2020, and then this year they played significantly more man. They were in the top half of the league indeed this year in percentage of cover one, but that started a year ago in 2020.
Okay. And how would you describe a Mike Zimmer defense? More man than zone or zone?
There's another team where I think there's a sense because of where Zimmer's been in his career that that they play more zone. There always been talk of cover four, which has been a Zimmer staple for years. But they're another team. See, a lot of these zone teams, Geoff, have morphed into playing more man because you have to. Minnesota was in the top 10 in the league this year in cover one percentage. So that might be surprising to a lot of people because they have this general worldview of Mike Zimmer. But more and more teams have moved to playing, teams that were zone based have started to play more man. Now there are still some teams that obviously didn't play much man at all, but Tampa Bay, for instance, which is very surprising given how much Todd Bowles likes to blitz, they were near the bottom of the league in terms of percent of cover one. But I think that for the most part, teams do want to feel that they can line up and play man and be comfortable doing that.
Yeah, and matter of fact, the word we've gotten over the last several weeks is that Eagles will continue to play. At least they want to, of course.
Right.
Sometimes, as Geoff talked about, sometimes you're married to the personnel that you have and what's best for them. But if Gannon has his druthers, talking to people who work with him before, he'd like to play a lot of man coverage.
Yep.
So I do believe. So let's start digging in here with the players, and a guy, Greg, that you just don't often see this. A guy becomes one of the top players at his position at an important coverage position, like corner, and a guy was not drafted. J.C. Jackson, the Patriots, and sometimes the Patriots guys, listen, if they don't franchise him, obviously he can walk. I can't imagine they're going to let him go if they can't get an extension done. But let's talk about him, Greg, because he's been a great story of development.
J.C. Jackson is a really, really, really good player. And the thing is he's on a team, just to give you an example, they actually started to play a little more zone this year, New England, and they actually started to do that when Jonathan Jones, their slot corner, got hurt. But for the most part, they are a single high safety defense. Okay, New England was among the highest percentage cover one teams in the league. And then when you add in cover three, which is the zone version of single high safety, New England was near the top of the league. They may have even played more single high than any team in the league. So J.C. Jackson is used to playing on the outside, matching up man to man. He was their matchup corner too. So he's used to matching up to the top receivers on opposing teams, and he's a really good corner. I remember watching him coming out of the University of Maryland, and he had some issues, Adam, as you probably recall, because I think he was originally a Florida recruit, if I'm not mistaken, and he had to leave school there. I could be wrong on where he was before Maryland, but I remember really liking his college tape. And was he late pick or undrafted? He was
undrafted. Yeah.
Undrafted. And I think that's because of the off the field stuff. Because he had traits. He had traits to play corner, which have now come out in the league.
If we're under the assumption the Eagles are trying to get younger and better, which I think we're all on the same vein with, I don't know that guys like Stephon Gilmore or Joe Hayden or Chris Harris, who's a slot corner, really enter the conversation for us. But I'll ask you really quickly of those three, Greg, before I get into the next question. Is there one that you like, Stephon, who has been a very good again for
they want him back? Just so you know, talking to the Panthers, they definitely want him back. But no, Greg, feel free to talk about who you want. But yeah, they talking to the Panthers, they definitely want Gilmore back.
Between Gilmore, Hayden, Patrick Peterson, and say Chris Harris, and even Verrett, he's 30 now. Is there one of those guys, Greg, that
they won't
stands
be in
out?
Verrett. Yeah, they won't be in the Verrett.
I know we like to do this for all NFL fans, though. So I mean, not
for sure.
I mean, unfortunately, Jason Verrett's been hurt so much, but when he's played, he's been really good. But it's just been a shame because he's a very, very good player. Yeah. So who else? Who else did you mention?
The older guys like Peterson and Gilmore,
Peterson. I think to me, And Peterson's probably a Hall of Famer, but I think he's past his prime. And I think the tape tells you that. Again, I want people to understand that when I say things like that, that's purely based on tape study. It's not just a personal opinion. I'm throwing it out there. As we joke, it's not a take. It's based on tape. I mean, I don't think Patrick Peterson can really line up and play man coverage anywhere near as effectively as he did years ago. I think he gets beat a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's focus on some young guys. Two younger ones would be Kevin King from Green Bay, Darius Williams from the Rams. Can you kind of break those two guys down and tell me if you like any of them for what the Eagles do defensively?
Yeah, Kevin King's been up and down in Green Bay. I mean, they wanted him to be their corner really opposite Alexander, but clearly they didn't view him that way because they drafted Eric Stokes from Georgia this past year, and King really did not become a starter again. So in the mind of Green Bay, Kevin King was not good enough to start on the outside. He's long, he's got pretty good athleticism. He's probably not, again, if you're dealing with just bringing people in for competition, Geoff, I think he's fine. I don't know what kind of money he would command. That's Adam's area more than mine. My guess is I shouldn't say that because corners are always in demand, but I don't think people would be signing him to be their top corner. And obviously the Eagles have a top corner in Slay, but I think King is not a given. He's just got different traits than, let's say, Steven Nelson because he's long. He's 6'2", 6'3". He's more athletic than Steven Nelson, but he's very up and down in his performance.
A lot of injuries, significant injury history. He's been hurt a lot. Yeah. And then I got to ask you, by the way, before we move on to other players, you watched Rasul Douglas this season. Why did he play so well?
That's a great question. I mean, Rasul Douglas has always been kind of a cluer and a keyer. He's not really a true press man player. He kind of sees things and he reacts. That's always been his game. And he just did that really, really well this year. And look, interceptions are always hard to say. Some years guys get interceptions, some years they get none. It worked out, but he played really well. But that's the kind of corner that he is. We saw that when he was in Philly. They obviously got rid of him, but he's a certain kind of corner. He was kind of that way coming out of college as well. No one really saw him as a press man corner. He's more zone based than he is press man. In Green Bay, they played a decent amount of cover one, but Green Bay, they mixed and matched a lot. They played a lot of different coverages. They also played a good amount of cover 4, which is a good coverage for Rasul Douglas. So he went to a place where they played coverages that fit what he can do.
How about Darius Williams from the Rams, Greg?
Yeah, he's small. I mean, I think he's a good player. And he played almost predominantly outside for them. So he's, he came in sort of, people started to know him a couple of years ago when he made a bunch of picks, but he's a smaller corner. He's a slight corner. There's a team that did not play a lot of man coverage this year. They played a little more as the season progressed, but, they did not play much man coverage, which is surprising given the fact that they had Jalen Ramsey and people just assume that they played a ton of man, but they were among the lowest percentage cover 1 teams in the league. So Williams this past year did not play much man coverage at all.
So Greg, we're going to assume the Eagles are going to draft a corner in the first round. As of right now, I think that's a pretty good bet, but we'll see what they do. But they also like to add, Geoff brought up Steven Nelson. Let's say there's another guy like Chris Harris. I know he's older. He turns 33 in June. They had pretty strong interest in him a couple years ago before he went to the Chargers, though Eagles, we were told they didn't make an offer, but they were definitely interested. Let's just say he becomes a bargain for either the Eagles or somebody else. What does he bring to the table? And is he still just playing inside? Could he also play on the outside?
Well, he can play on the outside. He played both this year. To me, at this point in his career, he's better on the inside, but they have Maddox. And unless they think that Maddox can play outside, but I don't think they feel that way. I think they signed Maddox to be their slot corner. Don't you guys agree?
Correct.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. So, I mean, Harris would be, he'd be a 1-year guy if they felt like they couldn't, that whoever they drafted was not ready to play, or that they couldn't get anybody else, and they'd play Harris outside. And he's always been feisty, competitive, tough. In his prime, he was a really, really good player who played both inside and outside. To me, at this point in his career, he's a slot player. But if they signed him, he wouldn't be signed to play the slot.
What did the tape look like on Xavier Rhodes last year, Greg?
Xavier Rhodes, I think, is kind of near the end, Geoff. I think he's a big corner. I don't think he moves as well. Those are the guys, to me, you sign when you can't get anybody else. And it's no knock on Rhodes. He's had a really good career. It's just it happens to everyone. He's later in his career. Was in and out of the lineup last year. He's faced a lot of injuries the last couple of years. So you don't even know if he can go 17 games. And that's the issue you face with older corners. For all the stopgap corners that you might sign, that's the issue you face.
One guy that I find interesting, and Carolina's got a bunch of corners whose contracts are up. One of them is Dante Jackson, who has started a bunch of games. What does the tape look like?
Yeah. Jackson's one of those guys. He can run. He's a smaller corner. He can play press. He's a guy that, again, he's faced a lot of injuries, but he's not an older player. I mean, Adam, do you know his age? I mean, he's not an old player.
What's this? His second? It should be no older than 26, I believe.
Yeah, correct. I mean, he'd be a guy worth taking a shot on, depending on what the cost is, because he's got traits. I mean, he can run. He does play with some physicality. I think that he's never quite become what people thought, but he has traits to do that. So maybe a change of scenery would help him out.
26 years old, by the way. Had a good game against the Eagles this past year, I remember.
Yeah, he'd be an interesting guy, because he's younger and he's got what you can't teach. He's got speed.
That always helps. I'm trying to think if there are some guys here who you wonder if they're worth taking, assuming, again, Eagles are probably going to draft at this position heavily and give the opportunity to someone they draft to claim that starting role, but they do like to bring in certain guys on 1-year deals just to have as someone there, like an insurance policy, right?
Sure, I would think if, look at pick 15, 16, and 19, if they draft a corner with one of those, my guess is they'd be drafting that player to be the starter opposite Slay. Now, you never know until you get to OTAs and training camp until a guy performs or doesn't perform. But it would seem to me if they do draft a first-round corner, they're drafting him to play.
Off that, Greg, let's talk about Zach McPherson, who is an outside corner. I know he could play both, but he played more in the second half at times. What did you think from his tape? But I know you weren't super high on him coming out of the draft.
I was not super high on him watching him when he played. I never saw him as an outside corner in the NFL based on his college tape. Obviously, the Eagles did, and I just don't think he has the movement skills to play outside in this league. I think his transition and his change of direction is a little sticky and segmented. I just don't see him as an outside corner, and unless you're going to play zone. And if they're going to play more man, I don't see him as that guy.
Greg, P.J. Williams, Eli Apple, Mackenzie Alexander, anyone stand out to you?
Well, Alexander's a slot corner 100%.
Okay, so you wouldn't chase after him, but anybody else that kind of stands out as, you would give it a Trey Flowers? Is Carlton Davis really a free agent? I didn't even realize that.
He ain't going to walk. Yeah, he's not going to walk.
No, he'll probably get a nice longer-term deal. But anyone Akilo Weatherspoon, someone you'd say, hey, I would give this guy a 1-year deal to come into camp and see what he's got?
I would give Akilo Weatherspoon a 1-year deal. I thought that I liked his tape coming out of Colorado. He can play press. He's long. He struggled in San Francisco, the team that initially drafted him. He went to Pittsburgh this year, and he actually played well. He had to play a lot in Pittsburgh this year, and he actually played well. And I think he has the traits that if you want to play more man coverage, he's still a young player. Again, without knowing these players, so I can't speak to work ethic, anything like that. But I liked his tape, and he did play well in Pittsburgh this year. So he'd be a guy I'd seriously consider on a 1-year deal.
Wow, that's a good one. Now, could he play both inside and outside if needed?
No, he's an outside corner.
Or strictly outside, okay. And
he's long, he's athletic. He kind of fits the mold that teams like in today's NFL because of his length.
What happened with him in San Francisco with the Niners? Why did he lose his starting job? Or
From people that I've spoken to,
okay.
because you can't. I mean, sometimes you can get a feel for this, but you don't know for a fact that he totally lost his confidence. He got beat a couple of times, and then he just started to play scared. So his traits never came out.
He was a starter, right? When he started?
Oh, yeah. They drafted him in the third round, maybe, Niners. When you guys want to check that. I think he was a third-round pick out of Colorado, if I'm not mistaken. And like I said, he has the traits you ideally like. He's long. He's athletic. He can run a little bit. Not a burner, but very few corners are burners. He had everything you looked for, and it just didn't work out. And then he got the opportunity in Pittsburgh this year, and he played well.
Let me ask you a question off that. Tall corners. I remember talking to Bill Pauline about that. His worry was about how they transition with their hips, because the longer you are, the harder it is to be fluid. And Weatherspoon is over. This is a good name here that Geoff brought up. That he's over 6'2". I know this is a general question or general topic here, but when you've watched the Richard Shermans of the world, could they only play zone? The taller guys are at 6. Kevin King's bottom 6'3". Do you see them playing both?
Theoretically, they can play both. It's, to me, and again, maybe a defensive back coach would tell me I'm wrong. To me, it's easier for those guys to play press than it is to play off, where they have someone then running at them, and then they have to transition and change direction, and that becomes a little segmented. But normally the reason that taller corners, Adam, struggle at times is because they tend to be high cut and long legged. And when they're high cut and long legged, they tend to have a little more problem just kind of sinking and being able to smoothly, turn their hips. And that's, again, we're starting into getting these scouting cliches, but it's true. This is what people look at.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
absolutely. Hey, one last guy I want to throw at you, Greg, more for sentimental reasons. I think this guy's name for Eagles fans kind of represents a little bit of an inside joke when they had so many injuries in the secondary and they had to play guys like Josh Hawkins and Trey Sullivan. And then there was Chandan, right? Sullivan, right? Chandan Sullivan, who I believe is a former Eagle as well.
Yep.
He is a free agent.
He's been the slot corner for Green Bay for the last 2 years and he's played pretty good.
I think he was a safety with the Eagles, and they must have
moved him to the corner. I mean, that's what he's played for Green Bay. So again, you get into that same issue. They just signed Maddox. They're not looking for a slot corner.
Right. How was the tape on? Is he a pretty decent player though?
Pretty good player. Oh, there have been games this year he played literally almost every snap.
Wow,
that's crazy.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. Well, he does. People remember that time where Jim Schwartz was working with like the third stringers at 3 or 4 spots in the secondary, and he was one of them. So good story of development there for a former Eagle. All right, let's switch sides. We're going to talk to safety. Now, this is a little bit different, right? Philosophically, at least if we go by recent history for the Eagles, this is a position that they don't address very high in the draft. Now, maybe that changes, but they haven't. And then they have not been afraid, though, Howie Roseman, to try to find a good young safety on a second contract to be part of the growing process. We saw that first with Malcolm Jenkins, then Rodney McLeod as well. And then last year they brought a 1-year deal in. They brought Anthony Harris for his familiarity with the scheme. So as we look around and we see that both Anthony Harris and the other starter, Rodney McLeod, are both free agents, and that the Eagles are going to probably be in the market here, Greg, is there kind of a second-year guy? Now, Jesse Bates is at the top. I don't mean second year, second contract guy. Jesse Bates obviously was franchise tagged. I don't know if he's going to hit the open market or if the Eagles are going to be in on the number 1 free agent safety. But there's Bates, there's Marcus Williams from the Saints as well. How do you feel about those two guys?
Well, Marcus Williams is a post safety. That's what he is. So you have to understand, if you sign him, he's playing on the back end. And he's very good at it, by the way, but that's what he is. The name that you didn't mention is on the list that Adam sent me, but to me has always been a fascinating player. And I think he's gotten lost because he's been on a bad team. But I think Justin Reed's a fascinating prospect. Justin Reed is a really, really good athlete. And I can tell you for a fact that if he had stayed at Stanford for his final season, they were going to move him to corner. So they viewed him as having the traits to line up and play corner. So he's a really good athlete. He can play on the back end. He can play in the box. He can cover tight ends, which he's done in this league. Justin Reed, to me, of the safeties that are out there, I think he's your best one.
Wow.
You know, and what the Eagles, I think, would ideally like to do.
So when you say ideally what they like to do, give everybody an idea of what that conceptually looks like at safety.
Well, I think they'd like their safeties to be interchangeable. I don't think they want to have one safety who's a post safety and one safety who's a box safety. I think they'd like their safeties to be interchangeable. We've seen that. With Gannon. We saw McLeod played on the back end, played in the box, blitzed. Reed can do all these things. Plus, he can match up to tight ends because he has man-to-man coverage skills. So he kind of fits, and he's big. He's a big guy. He's not small. So I think he kind of fits, what you'd ideally like if you're Jonathan Gannon at the safety position.
Interesting. Quandre Diggs is coming off a major injury. He is 29 years old, though, and has played well. Is this major injury going to be, Adam, I'll start with you. I mean, that's going to be probably a major impediment to him to start the year.
What's his injury?
Fracture and dislocation of his ankle. Yeah, he's a long ways away from being ready. And now, but I'm glad you brought him up because I know where Geoff's going here. The Eagles have a history. You could go back to when Andy Reid was here. They might bring in an older safety. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's a third safety. Sometimes it's a second safety. But they have a history, though, as Geoff also mentioned, and this is more important for a guy like Justin Reid, but taking a guy at 25 or 26, and by the way, Reid just turned 25, guy at 25 or 26, a la Roddy McLeod, boy, that was a home run, or Malcolm Jenkins at 2014-ish, who is on a second contract, and that also was a home run. I like Reid in that role, but I'm going to give you another one. Because I know this guy's had good tape and not so good tape, but Tracy Walker from the Lions, I know from talking to the Lions over the years, I've always liked him, but I don't know if he's played quite to what they would have believed. What from Tracy Walker from your tape study, and I don't know how much you watch the Lions, Greg. I know you watch all the teams, but how much you've studied him. Is Walker a guy that could fit?
Well, I'm familiar with him to some degree. He's a guy that could fit. He's interchangeable as well. He's also matched up to tight ends. He's a small school guy, but I think he was a third-round pick. He wasn't a late pick. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, you could check that. But no, Tracy Walker's another guy that can play both on the back end, in the box, match up to tight ends. He's still a younger guy, right, Adam?
He just turned 27 from Louisiana Lafayette. Yes.
Yeah, and what round was he taking?
You got it right. Third round in 2018. Yep.
I remember doing him in college. I thought he was a good prospect. And I think he's had to, again, because the Lions have been bad, but I think he's actually been a solid player from what I've seen on tape.
There you go.
And I think he does fit that mold. He's not quite as big as Reid. But I think what they bring to the Eagles would be similar. And my guess is he would not be a big money guy. Like, I don't think he'd be demanding a big contract. I would bet that Reid would get more because I think he was a second round pick. He's got better overall traits with his size, but Walker could fill the same kind of role.
Two guys of names caught my attention, and I don't know if Terrell Edmonds is going to be going anywhere with the Steelers, although they do have some other contracts they've got to figure out. But Terrell Edmonds, Xavier Woods, both under 30, both played a lot of snaps last year for their respective teams. Xavier Woods with Minnesota and Edmonds with the Steelers. Craig, do they fit what the Eagles going to do, or are these guys going to, in your mind, blow up somebody's salary cap?
I think Edmonds is a limited player in what you can do with him. I think Edmonds is a box player, almost kind of a safety linebacker hybrid. I think he struggles in man coverage. I don't think you can really play him on the back end regularly. I mean, look, no one does the same thing all the time, but I don't think you can play him on the back end regularly unless you're going to play a ton of cover 4, split safety coverage. So I'm not sure he would fit exactly what the Eagles want.
Okay.
Who's the other one you mentioned?
Xavier Woods.
Xavier Woods. Well, he was in Dallas. Then Minnesota signed him to replace Anthony Harris. I think he's one of those solid players. I think he's another guy that can play both on the back end and in the box. He's been a solid pro too. I mean, he's another small school guy who I remember him coming out as well. And I thought he was a good player. And I think he's probably, again, I know this is kind of a shade word, and I don't want to. I haven't studied him in hardcore detail, so I don't want to make it sound like I know this guy, all the ins and outs. But I think he's one of those solid pros. I think you can line up and play with Xavier Woods if he's your starter. Is he great? No, but I think you can do multiple things with him, and therefore he would fit what the Eagles would ideally be looking for.
Boy, it sounds like that's what Anthony Harris was for the Eagles last year. Basically, a guy you can line up and play with, but is not going to do anything outstanding for you.
And I think ultimately you want to be better than that, but then it comes down to, can you be better than that? Because you still got to line up and play with someone. Fans, and we all do this, so I'm not saying fans like I'm better than fans, but we all think sometimes, you got to get rid of that guy. You got to move on. And teams are aware of this too, but you got to move on to someone. You can't just say, he can't play, let's get rid of him. Okay, well, who's going to play then? I mean, you got to line up and play. So that's always easy to say, and every team has players that they know they'd like to be better at that position. They're not going to say that publicly, of course, unless you're the Colts with Carson Wentz. But most teams won't say that publicly. But in their meetings, they know, hey, we'd like to get better at that position. But if you can't, for whatever reason, then you know what? You got to line up. You got to dance with the girl who brung you. Sometimes that's the way it works.
No doubt.
So if the Eagles go at safety with the older route, again, to bring somebody in at the tail end of their career, Jaquiski Tartt has won a lot of games. So he's been there for the turnaround. He just turned 30. He's been hurt. He's been on IR actually 4 times.
Hurt a lot.
But he's been hurt, but the guy's been a starter for a long time. What does his tape look like, and is he just a strong safety?
Probably. He does play on the deep, on the back end on occasion. Clearly, that's a team that's played more cover 4 the last couple of years, so he's played more cover 4. If he's not a true post safety, if you're going to play single high, he's done that, but he's not. That's not really his deal. He's predominantly a box player. He can match up to tight ends, but that's what Jaquiski Tartt is. And he's another guy. He was a fascinating player, another small school guy. I believe he came out of Samford, if I'm not mistaken. A player whose tape was really interesting in college because he was physical. He has build-up range. Like, you wouldn't say he's rangy, but he's got build-up range because, once he gets going. I think he's another solid player. The question is, can he fit what you want, or do you have to play him specifically as a box player? And
all right, Greg, three guys that I want to throw at you, and you tell me if one of them fits or doesn't fit. You may be able to eliminate one from the start, but they're all under 30. Jaron Kearse, who played on Dallas last year, DJ Reed from the Seahawks, and Jordan Whitehead, who I thought had some good games against the Eagles when he played against them. He's only
talking
25.
about the Bucs safety, right?
Yeah.
I like him a lot. I really like Jordan Whitehead, and I think he can do pretty much everything, and he's a really good blitzer. Of the names you mentioned, Reed is more of a corner, by the way, the guy you mentioned. Right, DJ Reed, you mentioned him?
Oh, yeah.
He's a corner.
Okay.
Because isn't he the Kansas State kid?
Yeah, he's from Seattle. Yeah, in fact, he changed sides. He struggled on one side. And
he's a corner.
Side.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's probably more of a slot corner than an outside corner. He's actually a pretty good player, but he's really a corner more than a safety.
Gotcha.
But Whitehead's a really good player. Surprisingly, a little bit unknown and overlooked, given the team he played for. Obviously, more people talk about Winfield. More people talk about other players on that defense because they've got a lot of good ones. But Jordan Whitehead is a really nice player who can do multiple things. He would fit what the Eagles do very well. And you mentioned one other name.
Jaron Kearse.
Oh, Jaron Kearse had a phenomenal year in Dallas, by the way. He's kind of a hybrid. He's a safety linebacker. They played a ton of big nickel with 3 safeties. He was, in a sense, the third safety. He was their tight end matchup, did a really good job. But he filled a specific role in Dan Quinn's defense because they ended up playing big nickel as their base. They hardly ever played with 3 linebackers. So he became a hybrid linebacker safety and played almost every snap. But he's he's a certain kind of player, played that role exceptionally well this year. But you have to know what he is, and you have to have a specific role for him.
One thing when you say you got to know what he is, the safety position, Greg, when I first started covering the league in 2000-ish, that area, or 99, it was like, okay, strong safety, back, like post safety.
Right.
Box safety. You had one guy up, guy back.
Well, and people thought you could get a safety anywhere, Adam. Remember?
Right. Well, okay, so Mosher's been after this, and I think he's right, okay? The Eagles have ignored this position for years, as we just outlined. They like to bring the veteran in. Sometimes they go with two veterans. But not just for the Eagles, for any team now, as you've studied tape for decades, how is the safety position, and include also that your talks, because I know you say you talk to a lot of coaches. I know that coaches will tell you certain things about how they see the position. So how has that safety position changed over the years when you've graded tape? What do teams need to see out of that position?
Well, the game's cyclical. So what happens is you have to respond to what's happening. Sometimes offenses have to respond to what defenses do. Sometimes defenses have to respond to what offenses do. So think of it this way. It's very simple. Who's going to cover all these athletic tight ends?
Yeah.
So you need a safety who can do that. And it can't be old school safeties. You used to think old school safeties, a big physical safety who's going to play in the box, who's essentially a linebacker. Then you got your post safety who's rangy, and covers the back end. Well, now you need athletic safeties who can cover tight ends and backs if you choose to. I mean, if you're playing Alvin Kamara, you may not choose to put a linebacker on Alvin Kamara. Mm-hmm. There's more of those guys than there've ever been. There's more athletic tight ends than there've ever been. You want to have, Derwin James covering Darren Waller when the Chargers play the Raiders. You don't want to, you need safeties that have athletic ability, that have length, that can play in space, that can play at all three levels of the defense. So the game is cyclical. Safeties have now had to respond to what offenses. I remember sitting the year that Steve Spagnuolo was out. He used to come, because I know Spags very well, and he used to come and sit with me and watch tape the year he was out every Monday, and we would just talk ball. We'd watch tape and talk ball, and I remember just saying to him, well, if you don't have this particular player, what does that mean for you? And he says, well, that means the options in my playbook are limiting. That means I can't do certain things that I'd like to be able to do. See, that's the way you have to think about it. It's the same on offense. If you don't have certain kinds of players, your playbook shrinks. On defense, if you don't have certain kind of players, your playbook shrinks. And by the way, the other teams know that. they watch the tape. Yeah. So, that's why positions are important. It's easy to prioritize positions, and we all do that, and teams do that to a certain extent. But if you don't have certain things, there's things you cannot do.
Speaking of Steve Spagnuolo, somebody he's familiar with is going to be a free agent, Tyrann Mathieu. Where is he at, Tyrann Mathieu, in this stage of his career? Not that he's very old. I don't even think he's 30 yet.
He's a really good player, Tyrann Mathieu.
Still
really
good player.
I mean, he's because he can do everything. He can play in the back end. He can cover the slot. He's phenomenal. The Chiefs were very good with disguise and late movement. He's really good at that because he's really savvy and smart. He was their middle hole defender in cover 2, and he disguised it exceptionally well. He can blitz. He's aggressive playing the run. Mathieu can do it all. Mathieu's a great player. I mean, if Mathieu's healthy and checks out and is fine, he's going to get a big deal. And I doubt that the Eagles would. I mean, I don't know what Howie Roseman's going to do, but I would doubt that they'd pay what Mathieu's probably going to command on the open market.
Yeah, he didn't turn 30 till May. So, but considering he's been in the league since 2013, my goodness gracious,
he's a really good player.
Still
and
great.
He's super savvy. I mean, he's one of those guys, he just sees it.
Greg, I guess we'd be remiss if we didn't ask you, I mean, while we're talking safeties, about the Eagles' current situation of guys under contract. And I don't know how much you laser focused in your Eagles tape study on those moments when K'Von Wallace did get on the field, but does there anything that kind of jog your memory about K'Von Wallace so far as an Eagle? And then, of course, Marcus Epps, who
I like.
About. Yeah, you like him.
I like Marcus Epps, and I think he could be a starting safety in the NFL. And I think he's versatile. I think he can play on the back end. I think he can play in the box. Keep in mind, in the playoff game, they matched him up on Gronk. They wouldn't have done that if he didn't think he can match up to tight ends. So that tells you they believe he can do that. I don't, again, this is all based on tape study. You guys know it's never personal with me. I don't think Kayvon Wallace is the guy. I don't think you can go into the season thinking he's your starting safety and feel really good about that.
Right.
Is it just one thing on Wallace? Go back to Clemson. Did you notice when you watched him pre-draft, did he have good coverage skills or was he just a box guy?
To me, he's a box guy.
Yeah.
He's not big enough.
Right.
Okay.
So it sounds like the Eagles would be in good shape if they came out of free agency with Justin Reed, if they wanted Marcus Epps to start, and maybe they signed like a Jaron Kearse 1 or 2 year deal to be your third, like kind of your big nickel and have a third safety. It sounds like that would be
there's a starting safety here to sign if they want to do that. And again, without talking about the numbers, because that's, Adam knows that way better than I do. I don't follow that closely. And I'll be the first to admit that. But there's a safety here to sign if you're willing to do so.
All right, there you go.
Yeah, Justin Reed. What a name. Wow.
Yeah, Jordan Whitehead sounds like there's.
Yeah, I like Whitehead and Reed. Of these safeties who are young, Whitehead's not old either. He's the Pitt kid, right? He's the kid who came out of the University of Pittsburgh, I believe. Yeah. Yep. He's a good player.
All right, there's a lot to chew on there. A lot of cornerbacks and a lot of safeties that we just went through. Next episode, pass rushers. We know the Eagles are always looking at pass rushers, so Greg will be all studied up on edges and D tackles with upfield burst and all that, and we'll get into what we expect from Jonathan Gannon's defense and the defensive line look and what kind of pass rushers he'll be looking for. That'll be next week edition. So again, Greg, great job. Thanks for everything, and I look forward to catching up with you next week.
All right, guys, appreciate it. Thanks.
All right, for Greg Cosell and Adam Caplan, I'm Geoff Mosher. You've been watching The Intel with Greg Cosell.